Beneath the deceptive calm of the night, a carefully concealed conspiracy begins to surface, threatening to unravel the fragile bonds between those who once stood side by side. This is not merely a story of betrayal, it is a slow, suffocating descent into darkness, where loyalty fractures, trust rots from within, and every choice carries the weight of irreversible consequences. At its core lies a single, cold-blooded act that sets everything into motion, pulling the characters into a spiral of rage, grief, and retribution. There are no heroes here, no innocent hearts untouched by the storm. What follows is a brutal exploration of how a single betrayal can infect everything it touches, transforming pain into hatred, silence into war, and human souls into weapons. The night was unnaturally still, as if the world itself had sensed that something terrible was about to be set in motion. Beneath that suffocating silence, an invisible force pulsed through the air, cold, methodical, deliberate. This was not the kind of chaos that erupted from chance. It was the precision of a blade sharpened over years of quiet hatred. In the shadow of a carefully crafted conspiracy, a tragedy unfolded like a slow-moving storm. Hayley, driven by a hunger that had long devoured what was left of her conscience, made a choice that would shatter everything. When Naomi's body convulsed, the poison already coursing through her veins, time fractured. The world around her blurred into a haze of confusion and pain. In the deepest part of her, something precious was ripped away, a heartbeat silenced before it ever truly began. The child she carried, the fragile promise of a future she had begun to imagine, was gone in an instant. There was no explosion, no dramatic shattering of glass or sudden burst of screams. Only silence, as if the universe itself had exhaled and left nothing behind but a void. In that moment, everything that had held them together began to decay. Trust, loyalty, shared memories, and fragile alliances crumbled beneath the weight of betrayal. What Hayley had done was not just an act of cruelty against Naomi. It was a strike against the very foundation of what tied them all together. It was the kind of wound that did not bleed on the surface but hollowed out the soul, leaving behind something raw and unrecognizable. Naomi's world became a narrow corridor of pain. The walls pressed against her, cold and merciless, as if mocking her inability to escape. Her body ached with a brutality that words could never capture, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside her mind. Her grief was not quiet, it roared, it clawed, it devoured everything she had been. The image of what she lost burned into her memory like a scar carved by fire. No gentle voice would soothe her. No warmth could reach her. What was stolen from her could never be replaced. Hayley stood alone in the stillness of her room, staring at the darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly. Her hands were steady, too steady, as if even her body had accepted the path she had chosen. She had planned every step, every dosage, every consequence. She had known exactly what would happen. For her, Naomi had been nothing more than an obstacle. Someone standing in the way of power, recognition, or something far darker, something she herself could no longer name without trembling. But even as the shadows wrapped around her like a second skin, something shifted in the air. The silence no longer felt like control. It felt like judgment. The walls seemed to breathe. The floor creaked as if something unseen pressed against it. A part of her, buried deep beneath layers of ambition and resentment, recognized what she had done. It wasn't remorse. It was something colder, the quiet knowledge that once blood has been spilled, nothing ever truly remains under control. The ripples of that act spread like a contagion. Those who stood near Naomi, friends, allies, people who once believed in shared loyalty, felt the shift before they even knew the details. A heaviness settled in their chests. Their hearts, still ignorant of the truth, reacted instinctively. The atmosphere itself had changed. It was no longer the tension of a secret. It was the beginning of war. Naomi's pain became a silent scream that echoed through the air, shaping every glance, every breath, every thought of those around her. Where once there had been trust, suspicion now grew like vines, twisting and tightening. Where there had been warmth, there was now the cold, metallic taste of fear. Betrayal has a way of staining everything it touches, not just the victim, but every soul caught in its orbit. In the quiet hours that followed, Naomi's grief transformed. It no longer resembled sorrow. It hardened into something sharper, something that bit back. The hollow inside her became a forge, melting down every tender emotion she once had and reforging them into a weapon. Rage, slow, deliberate, merciless, took shape within her. She no longer cared about finding justice. Justice was a luxury for the naive. She wanted retribution. She wanted to see something break. The people around them began to unravel. The tragedy exposed fault lines that had been buried beneath the surface for too long. Tiny cracks in trust became fractures. Fractures became chasms. Everyone had secrets. Everyone had motives. Hayley's betrayal was merely the spark that set the whole structure ablaze. No one was truly innocent anymore. Every corner whispered. Every breath carried accusation. No one dared to speak openly, yet everyone knew. Guilt lingered in the air like a bitter scent. Some avoided Naomi, unable to meet the hollow in her eyes. Others stared at Hayley too long, not because they knew, but because they felt. Instinct always precedes proof. And in that world of hidden knives, instinct was the only thing left. Hayley thought she had built a flawless plan. She thought she could control the storm she created. But betrayal has a way of turning on its maker. Her victory, if it could be called that, was nothing more than a fragile illusion. Every night grew colder. Every sound sharper. She no longer trusted the stillness she once commanded. She could feel something moving beneath the surface, like a creature circling beneath dark water. Naomi's rage was not loud. It was quiet, patient, deliberate. It seeped into her bones and coiled in her stomach like venom. The woman who once loved, trusted, and hoped was gone. In her place stood someone forged in loss. Her eyes no longer sought comfort. They sought weakness. She would not forget. She would not forgive. Around them, alliances shifted. Whispers turned to accusations. Accusations turned to decisions made in the dark. People who once swore loyalty began to weigh their survival against their morality. One by one, masks slipped. It was not just Naomi and Hayley anymore. The betrayal had infected them all. Some feared being next. Others saw opportunity in the chaos. And in the center of it all, Hayley watched as the world she had sought to control slowly began to turn on her. Naomi moved through her days like a shadow, silent but heavy, a presence no one could ignore. She didn't need to speak to make them feel it. Her grief became a weapon of its own, a mirror that reflected everyone's fear of what they could lose. The people around her began to make mistakes. Small ones at first. Then bigger. Trust broke down not with an explosion, but with a quiet, relentless pressure that crushed it from within. Hayley began to feel it in her chest, a tightness, a weight that grew heavier with each passing hour. She had not accounted for this. She had planned for the practical, the visible, the immediate. But rage is not predictable. It is not logical. It spreads like smoke, slipping through cracks no one notices until it is too late. The reckoning did not come in a single violent act. It came in waves. In the way eyes followed her down the hallway. In the way conversations died the moment she entered a room. In the way Naomi's silence wrapped around everything like a blade pressed against soft flesh. The fear that had once belonged to Naomi now belonged to Hayley. Every night, the darkness pressed closer. She could feel the consequences gathering like a storm on the horizon, inevitable, patient, cruel. She began to understand something Naomi had already learned: once you destroy what is sacred, you do not get to choose how the world falls apart. The collapse was not theatrical. It was slow, methodical, merciless. One bond after another snapped beneath the pressure. Naomi's presence became a force that pulled at every hidden fracture until there was nothing left but ruin. And Hayley, once the puppeteer, found herself ensnared in the very web she had spun. There was no room left for forgiveness. No one sought redemption. No one wanted explanations. All that remained was a quiet, burning rage that consumed everything in its path. The lines between victim and executioner blurred until they no longer mattered. In the end, there were only two kinds of people left, those who burned, and those who lit the match. And beneath that endless, suffocating night, their world fell apart, not in screams, but in silence. The night closed in like a final breath, heavy and merciless, swallowing every trace of what once was. Nothing remained untouched by the storm. What began as a single act of cruelty had grown into something far larger than any of them could have foreseen, an unstoppable current dragging everything down with it. The faces that once held trust now carried only exhaustion, suspicion, and the quiet echo of what had been lost. No one could escape the weight of it. Even those who thought themselves distant had already been marked by the invisible hands of betrayal. Naomi stood at the heart of this silent wreckage, not as a victim anymore, but as a force shaped by loss. The fragile woman she had once been was long gone. In her place was someone carved out of pain and sharpened by vengeance. Her rage no longer needed to speak. It lived in the way she moved, in the way she looked at the world with eyes that no longer saw hope, only consequence. The air around her seemed to tighten, as though reality itself recognized the inevitability of what was coming. Hayley, the architect of it all, could no longer feel the ground beneath her feet. The control she once clutched so tightly had slipped through her fingers like ash. She had wanted power, influence, victory. But betrayal does not end where the betrayer intends. It spreads, mutates, consumes. What she built in the shadows had turned against her, stripping away the illusion of safety she once wrapped herself in. She now lived with the weight of every silent accusation, every glance heavy with unspoken truth. The people around them had become hollow versions of themselves. Fear had replaced trust. Calculations replaced loyalty. Every bond had been tested, stretched to the breaking point, and most had not survived. The world they inhabited was no longer built on shared dreams, but on fractures, whispers, and lingering dread. And as the dust settled, there was no clear victor, only the echo of everything they had destroyed. This was the price of betrayal, not the triumph of one over another, but the slow, relentless decay of everyone. Naomi's rage had not saved her. Hayley's ambition had not protected her. Those who stood by had not been spared. They were all entangled in a web they could no longer undo, bound together by wounds too deep to heal. What remained was silence, not the kind that soothes, but the kind that lingers like a scar, reminding everyone of the moment everything changed. Somewhere in that silence, the world held its breath. Not because it expected redemption, but because it understood that once trust is shattered, nothing returns to the way it was. The pieces may be gathered, but they never fit the same again. And beneath that still, unyielding night, every soul carried their own quiet ruin. Some would live with it. Others would be consumed by it. In the end, there were no apologies. No forgiveness. No redemption. Only the remnants of choices made in the dark, and the weight of their consequences pressing down like a hand that would never let go. The story did not end with justice. It ended with the quiet acknowledgement that betrayal is a wound that never fully heals, and that sometimes, the most devastating wars are the ones fought in silence.